has the potential to require skills at the value claiming stage. So that means either in this particular case with BioPharm, there really wasn't an integrated potential because there were no other issues that were introduced beyond the price of the plant. So it's really just a value claiming negotiation. That is how much of that we identified 18 million in value out there can you get. But even if there's a potential to make the pie bigger, that is to be more integrative in nature, you still need to know how to claim some of the value that you want. So those are the big ones. To be sure, concessions, plan ahead of time. Concessions are reductions that you make throughout the process. There are 3 issues, and you want to think about these ahead of time. The pattern. Don't allow unilateral concessions, meaning that you make 2 in a row. That is, unless you think the party is near its very bottom walk away and you need to do it to make it happen. There's a case of a gentleman from the University of Michigan, well, associated with the University of Michigan, Stephen Ross. He's a developer, to my knowledge, a billionaire, and he wanted the naming rights for the University of Michigan's business school. So he wanted it to be the Ross Business School, which it is. But what happened is, the story goes that he offered the dean and the president of the University of Michigan $50 million to get the naming rights for the business school. And the president simply said, no. So Stephen Ross turned around and doubled his offer from $50 million to $100 million. Now, arguably, he got it, and maybe $50 million incrementally is not a lot for him. But he's left to be wondering, what could I have gotten? Did I have to make such a large concession in the face of somebody not giving a concession to me? The president simply said no. So he lost $50 million in a matter of seconds. The magnitude. There are 2 views here, and frankly, either of which can be okay. You can either A, have bigger concessions leading to smaller ones, which signals you're closing in on your final walkaway point. And this is the bigger to smaller is what people usually employ. Or you can go smaller to bigger, be very tough to make any concessions, and then finally start to give in which case people are relieved when you're not playing as tough later in the game. And lastly, the timing. Should you make an immediate concession? Should you gradually delay it? Or should you make gradual concessions, or do you delay them for a significant period of time? We know from studies that sellers who make immediate concessions, that is, immediate concessions, receive the most negative reaction from the buyer in terms of the object of sale. The reason for that is the minute the seller made such an immediate concession, it made the buyer believe that he or she was being taken advantage of, and there was a lot of room for concessions on the part of the seller. So it would have behooved the seller to play a little bit tougher before actually giving in to signal that he or she was making a substantive concession. Okay, so summary on distributive negotiations. You need to, A, set a clear target and resistance points. We know from studies that when people have designated targets that are strong, they will work harder to get them. And we know that if people set a bottom floor, they are much likely to walk away and feel satisfied. But if you don't have a strong target, you won't be willing to work as hard. So you need in your planning to think, I really want this. Otherwise, you may well find yourself not striving to work as hard and not being as satisfied with the outcome. You need to understand and work to improve your BATNA. We didn't go into this very much, but the key is, remember, a BATNA is your best available alternative. So in any negotiation, the best thing that you can do is have alternatives. So for example, if you want to really get a strong compensation package, have a number of different offers. If you want to get a good price on a car, do a substantial amount of research and be aware of a number of different cars out there that you can buy so that you can point to those in the event of the negotiation. Essentially, your alternatives are your power. If you don't have a lot of alternatives, you're in a weak bargaining or negotiating position. So always work to improve your BATNA. Start with a strong, aggressive offer. Make appropriate concessions and have thought about them ahead of time, and manage the commitment process, which is a pledge regarding a future course of action. The key to managing the commitment process is it should be finality, specific, and have clear consequences. So imagine if somebody says to you, we need a volume discount or there will be trouble. It's very vague, not final, not very specific. It's different than we must have a 10% volume discount. It's very specific in the next contract, or we will sign with an alternative supplier. So very clear consequences. If we don't get 10%, we'll go with somebody else next month. So you want to be very specific. That seems obvious, but a lot of people, when they're negotiating, get nervous. And they think, oh, I just got a deal. I think it'll work out. I don't want to push things. And then they leave and they think, ooh, what did I just agree to? Specifically. Okay. Very quickly, there's an ethics piece to this. Because remember, we talked about how Celtec, for example, would take anything over $7 million in this case. The question is, given BioPharm would have paid up to $37 million, was it worth? Would you feel good about getting such a low price? So if they would pay up to $37 million, Celtec would pay $7 million or more. There's $30 million in play there. So if you took $29 million of that value available by getting, say, $8 million as a price, is that ethical? And you need to be the one to determine that, even though we could talk about ethics frameworks. So just as a few examples, these are ways to think, have I been ethical? So one is, what if it turned out on the front page of the newspaper or television? Would you shrink away in embarrassment because you just took advantage of the other party, or would you feel very comfortable with it? If you did feel comfortable with it being on the front page, you probably feel like it's ethical. The reverse golden rule, how would I feel if my opponent did this to me? If you feel like you'd be incredibly angry if somebody did it to you, probably best not to do it to somebody else. Role model. Would I advise, that should be an S, others to do this? If you wouldn't advise somebody outside of your situation to do it, it's probably not ethical. Third-party advice. So go to somebody who you trust. Don't reveal your own voice in this. Just describe the situation in terms of two parties and allow the person to decide whether he or she thinks it's ethical. And strengthen your bargaining position. So, for example, have alternatives. So that will help you to be less likely to engage in ethically unscrupulous activities, to the extent that you can say, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just go to my alternative. And in that way, you won't take advantage of another party. Okay, so practicing integrative negotiation techniques. Let me make sure I get to this. Okay, to be sure, because I don't remember where I put it exactly, Texoil is an integrative negotiation. And the reason we'll get to in just a minute. How do you know a negotiation has win-win potential? It's a big question. Does the negotiation contain more than one issue? Many start off that way, but it's realized that more issues are at play. So as an example, if we're just vying for office space, it's possible that we could disentangle what seems to be one issue, the office, for window space, the size of the office, so all of a sudden there are more than one issue. Do the parties have different preferences? This is huge. It's the differences in preferences, beliefs, and capacities that may be profitably traded for joint gain. So that is a biggie. If you can figure out what people's interests are and their priorities, you can figure out if they care more about certain things than you do, and you can engage in what's called log rolling. So you can ask, can other issues be brought in? So as an example, San Marino, California, there were firefighters who were negotiating their contract, their compensation contract. It was initially about salary, which is one issue. So once that happens, it can become very contentious because a win for the firefighters is a loss for the city, right? So that means it can become very contentious and ugly, and there's only so much value because a win for the firefighters is a loss for the city and vice versa. But instead, the negotiators brought in several more issues by bringing in benefits in addition to salary, the allowance of cost savings. So could the firefighters save costs, which could then be distributed to the firefighters so that in their budget, and could the firefighters take on more responsibilities within the community for which they could be paid? So what started out as one issue became ultimately four. And in addition, they shared information on the city's budget, the cost-benefit analyses, operating costs, And there was that sharing of information that built trust and enabled them to bridge the gap.